Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. In this video, we're going to be talking about things that just look great in the garden in the fall. Not really going to talk about fall color, like fall color on shrubs or trees that we can get on lots of plants, but things that just are either still blooming well into fall, things that start blooming in the fall into winter here in my area in Raleigh, North Carolina, Zone 7B. And then, of course, things like conifers, which can look their absolute best this time of year with lots and lots of new growth on them. Here's a little dwarf pine that's a great example of that. This one's called green penguin. And you can see all the new growth on it. That's happened since we've gotten cooler nights here in the, up into the beginning of October when I'm shooting this video. All summer long, it was just kind of sitting there, not doing anything really. It grew in the spring, and now it's growing again in the fall. So that's one example of it. And then the plant that I started with over there was the dwarf hinoki cypress, which has all that incredible new growth on it. Of course, we can have lots of annuals out here still blooming before we get a frost. But this video is more about things like this Cedrus atlantica, this sapphire nymph, which is just starting again to put on new bluish growth as it cools down, and it will actually look its best in the cool part of the spring and in the cool part of the fall. Here's a goldenrod with a sleeping bee on it. Actually, there's several sleeping bees on it. We have lots of perennials in this landscape that are picked specifically for blooming in the late summer and early fall. We have this Chapel Hill Misshuff lantana, which is in full bloom here right up until we get a frost. This one is perennial here in my area. There's a variety called Misshuff that's always been one of the most reliable ones, and then there's one called Chapel Hill Yellow, and someone named this one has a little more purple, has a little more of a purple hue to it. Chapel Hill Misshuff, but it's been very hardy for us. And again, it's one of those plants that starts blooming super late in the summer. It has to get really hot, but then it continues to bloom well into the fall. Another example of a fall blooming perennial or late summer blooming perennial is this Mexican sage, which you can see is in full flower now. Had a tropical storm Ian, it was Hurricane Ian, knock it over here in the last week, but the bees are still loving it and it's looking great. That one's marginally hardy here, and so it's been spring planted and it will come back every year reliably, and came back from last year. Back here behind it, kind of hidden, but not hidden for long because it's actually it's putting on just absolute full growth mode right now, is this golden pineapple sage. You can see the first flower starting to open on it. What a color contrast that is, but this is another fall bloomer. It comes up and it's gold, and it's just this little gold plant all season, and then right about now in September and October it just takes off and grows like crazy. Eventually a frost or freeze will knock it back in late October or early November. We have several fall blooming anemones in the landscape. Some of these through breeding now bloom quite a bit earlier, so they're blooming as early as August, and then right through the entire fall. Until we get actual frost or freeze to knock them back and slow them down, they just continue to put up flowers, and it's just amazing. I mean, they just don't stop. You can cut back spent stalks on them and they'll just keep coming. So variegation really stands out in the fall as well. This variegated Fatshedra really it's putting on as much growth as it did all season long. It's starting to actually get some flowers on it as well, which the pollinators absolutely love. And it's a cross between ivy. It's a non-invasive ivy, but it's also crossed with a plant called Fatsia. Fatsia will also bloom as it gets cooler, and both are just fantastic for pollinators. The bees absolutely go crazy for them. Here's one of several different Farfugium we have in the landscape, and you can see right here at the beginning of October they're starting to put up their flower spikes. These will be yellow flowers that will start opening in the next week or so. Again, all triggered by cooler nights in the fall. Beautiful plant, just incredible. A lot of variation in this plant, from variegations to spotted leaves to shiny leaves. Really amazing, super underused perennial in shady spaces. And then next to it, the Mahonia, the soft caress Mahonia is getting started flowering. It'll flower on and off anytime we have just kind of warmish periods during the winter time. That thing will be flowering and pollinators will be all over it. Here's a toad lily that was actually from a friend, dug out of a friend's garden and abused, and then put in the ground. And in a single season here, it's come back and it's starting to look pretty good. And here it is in bloom. In the late summer through fall is when we'd expect to see the flowers on these, and that's what's happening. Next year it should be bigger, better, fuller. This is a Miss Lemon abelia. This is a variegated abelia. These don't start blooming until midsummer. It's one of the latest flowering shrubs for spring or summer. But once they get started, they go right through the fall. The only thing that'll actually stop this thing from flowering at this point is us getting a frost to slow it down. And this is true of almost all abelia. As we're walking around the neighborhood right now, this is the best they've looked all year, and it's right here at the beginning of October. So whether it's a green foliage one with white or pink flowers, or one of these dwarf variegated ones like Miss Lemon or Radiance, they're really putting on a show right now, and the pollinators love them. Can't have a conversation about fall blooming plants without talking about osmanthus, and this is regular osmanthus fragrans. There's lots of different osmanthus, but when the nights get cooler, these start blooming. And you have to go and investigate where the smell is coming from, because the flowers are not super showy, but they are amazing. And I am not a person who's drawn to fragrant plants. I mean, most of the time they're just kind of overwhelming, but somehow osmanthus just has the perfect fragrance. This is Calicarpa americana. This is a white berrying version of Calicarpa. This is our native Calicarpa. There's actually a lot of Asian species of Calicarpa, and Japanese Calicarpa is probably the more common, honestly, in the landscape, because it stays typically a little smaller. These American beauty berries can get quite big. Of course, this is, like I say, this one's white. There's also pink, one called Welch's pink that's quite beautiful, and then more typically in the wooded spaces, you're going to see purple berrying beauty berries. Calicarpa is an amazing food for birds. They typically don't take them till they've become slightly fermented and aged a bit, but when they do, they'll absolutely clean them out. Can't talk about fall blooming perennials without talking about sedum. There's, of course, ground cover sedums and all kinds of interesting sedums, but these upright sedums like Autumn Joy here, bloom in the fall, late summer into the fall, and the pollinators absolutely go crazy for them. I will cut these in half during the middle part of summer, and it tends to keep them from flopping over later in the season. If they get too tall when they start blooming in the fall, if you get wind or rain, sometimes they can be floppy. Behind that are grasses, and those are Pennisedum back there, but there's a lot, of course, like Mullenbergia, and a lot, of course, this is the time of year when a lot of these ornamental grasses are just showing off, and what a fantastic, soft, flower spike in a perennial space. And we don't have enough of these, honestly, in our landscape. This is an azalea with kind of a confusing name because it's called hardy gardenia, which I think some people would then think it's a gardenia, but it's actually an azalea. It's called hardy gardenia because it has these wonderful double white gardenia-like flowers on it. They're not fragrant. It is an azalea, but this one has a tendency to bloom in the fall. I grew this one for years. Low mounding habit, great plant, and again, it blooms in the spring, and then it tends to bloom again in the fall. And when it does, it's just so bright and showy with those big double white flowers on it. Of course, the Encore azaleas are absolutely coming back to life here at the beginning of October. We have 7 varieties in our landscape at the house, and a few of them are starting to open a flower here or flower there, but we passed this autumn embers the other day in a neighborhood near us, and this thing just always stops me in my tracks when it's in bloom. It's one of my absolute favorite Encore azaleas. There's some other reds as well, but there's just something special about autumn embers that just really, really stands out. This is a Tartarian aster. There are lots and lots of fall blooming asters that the bees all absolutely love. There's one resting on it right now. This one is in a neighbor's landscape, and this one will spread around a bit over the years, but it's incredibly colorful. I don't think the color will actually be picked up well by the camera, but it's very purple with a yellow center. Again, pollinators go crazy for these things. We've missed the peak flower on the Lycoris out here, but Lycoris is definitely going to be a late summer fall bloomer. Surprise lilies, hurricane lilies. We've done a video on those with Tony Avent. Some of the Salvias, there are a lot of Salvias that are spring blooming and summer blooming, and then there are a lot of them that actually kind of look their best in the very late summer and fall. We already covered the Mexican sage and the pineapple sage and the Mexican sage at the house. And there's another one. And then right here, this is a hardy mum. You get a lot of the mums that are sold this time of year. Aren't the hardiest things in the world, but there are ones available. This one is budded up. It will start blooming here in the middle of October. Incredibly cold tolerant plants in the landscape. Behind it is a rose that's in too much shade, but I need to mention that roses actually kind of look their best to me sometimes in the fall. We get them, they'll bloom heavily in the spring, and then in the summertime they can go through some heat stress and really stop. But then this time of year, if we go over to the Raleigh Rose Garden right now, it's as good as it's looked all year. And those cooler nights really help those. And if Steph will pan over to the left, we got a big giant holly. Got to mention the fall burying plants. This is a big giant holly in this front yard. The berries are just starting to turn on it. We've got, of course, yellow berrying and red berrying upright hollies, and then deciduous hollies, which we don't have as many of here in our area as you do up in the north, where they're used quite a bit more. But then I have to mention pyracantha and other things. There's a lot of ways to get, these colorful berries into the landscape, and fall is the time that's happening. I'm over here at my buddy Rob's house, and I've shown this landscape several times, but I wanted to show you the bananas in their full glory this time of year, right here at the beginning of October. Of course, we're not far from a frost or a freeze at this point, probably 3-4 more weeks. But man, this is the best they look all year, and if the stuff can bring the camera down to me, you can get some sort of idea of the scale that we're talking about, how much these things grow in a single season. I'm 6 foot tall, so I'm guessing these are tipping out over 20 feet. The leaf, up at the top of that. We talked about the farfugium at the house, and I mentioned that there are spotted ones and variegated ones. Here's one that with that spotted look to it, and this one is not. Let's see if it's thinking about flowering here. As the nights get cooler, there it is right there. So I think within the next week or so, here's another one right there. So in the next week or so, these flower spikes will get up above the foliage and start flowering. Again, the pollinators absolutely love them. This was an interesting camellia back here. This one is another one of those confusing botanical names. This one is Camellia azalea. This is the species Azalea. So you have Camellia sasanquas, Camellia japonica. Azalea, it just happens to be another species of camellias, and this is a hybridized one. Really interesting, beautiful foliage on these, budded up like crazy, and that's the first flower on it. We've shown off a lot of Rob's Camellia japonica collection, which they'll be blooming in February, March, and April, but he's also got a tremendous collection of sasanquas, which this is a Camellia sasanqua, and we just saw that Camellia azalea variety. So a lot of the fall bloomers as well. This one is budded up like crazy, just starting to open up some flowers now, and so camellias are always going to be near the top of my list for fall blooming and fall interest plants. And so let us know down below this video, what are your favorite go-to things to brighten up a fall garden? We're lucky down here in the south that we actually have some things that will bloom, right up through, into October and into November, especially these things like these camellias right here, encore azaleas, lots of other things that we can have here. But are your go-tos grasses, some of the fall blooming perennials that we've seen in the video? Do you love roses? Because again, roses look great this time of year. Or or you like me and it's all camellias. Certainly at the top of my list. Let me know down below the video. Thanks for watching.